It started out as a dispute with a record company where a car was dropped. You know, he didn't want the car. There was a dispute with the tow company. Car was hooked. He paid $50. He wasn't happy about the $50 that he had to pay. He was angry about that. He was belligerent. There was somebody at the scene there, one of the witnesses, that tried to calm him down. A couple of times he hit the officer on the shoulder. The officer clearly told him, please don't hit me. At one point, he grabbed the officer around the neck, pulled his arm back, cocked his fist as though he was going to throw a punch. The officer...
Let me stop you right there. How did he grabbed him around the neck with one hand and went to punch him with another?
He grabbed him around the neck, cocked his arm, was going to punch the officer.
How did the officer allow that to get that far?
The officer was standing there. He grabbed him. People do that. He grabbed the officer. He pulled back his arm. The officer reacted to that action. He didn't do any of that before except for this. So then he grabbed the officer, pulled back his arm as though and said, I'm not going anywhere until I knock out this cop. Something to that effect. That's when the officer reacted, took the individual down, and when he went down to the ground, he tensed up. He put handcuffs on the individual. That's when he noticed he had an injury. He complained that his neck hurt. He called the fire department. He was taken to the hospital where he's being treated.
Does the officer have a taser, have a nightstick?
We have batons. We have an asp. We have pepper spray. We have taser. Pepper spray could have had a different effect on him. He could have gone into cardiac arrest. We could have tased him. He could have gone into cardiac arrest. So
how about just using the baton on his arm? You know, get your arm away from me.
I don't know that would have even been appropriate. I wasn't there. The officer did what he needed to do. He tried to use the minimal amount by just going hands-on, taking him to the ground and putting him in handcuffs. As a result of just taking him to the ground, he sustained an injury, and that's really the best I can tell you.
I mean, the way the officer describes it and the way these other people describe it are different, obviously.
Well,
but I was going to say, I mean, you do have a level of resistance?
I will send you
level. So isn't the stick, whatever you call it, the baton, part of that resistance? In other words, his neck was broken. So when you say he used the least, I guess, physical method of getting him to the ground, obviously it wasn't. Hitting him on the arm with a baton would have been less physical and less dangerous than that.
Hitting him on anybody gets struck with a baton usually ends up with a broken bone. Any people that
broken arm and a broken neck are two different things.
Right. It doesn't matter. He elected to place him on the ground using an arm bar, which is what's in the report. And in doing so, when he struck the ground or during the course of that action, he ended up sustaining an injury and was taken to the hospital.
I know you guys are investigating this, but it already sounds like you've decided that he was justified in what he did, and you're sort of like defending him already before you even know both sides of the story.
Well, there's a use of force that's completed, and once that use of force is completed and goes through training, if the officer used the appropriate techniques and force for the level of resistance, then it will be approved.
But you sound like you already have, the department has already decided that everything he did was correct.
Of what the officer wrote in his report, his blood alcohol was .187. So I'm just giving you the facts of the incident as reported by the officer. You have the information from anybody there and the family, and as I said, the case will go to this state. This is the officer.
Do you have a copy of that report?
No, because this case is going to be filed with the state attorney's office, which means this incident report, along with the charging affidavit, along with any photos, along with any witness testimony, along with anything else, will go to the state.
Why can't we just have the incident report, though? The initial incident report?
An active, ongoing investigation. I'm just telling you where from the report what happened that night. The investigation is still ongoing and active.
A man is really drunk and is 84 years old, obviously old. I'm sure the officer couldn't tell how old he actually was. But a lot of people are asking, why was that such extreme measure necessary? How old is the officer?
I don't know how old the officer is.
Tall, and how much does he weigh?
I don't know all those details, and I can't. Everybody's focusing on the age. I'm focusing on the action by the person. People 84 can kill officers too. Can cold cock my officer in the face, knock him out, and now you got an officer laying down on the ground with a gun, and everything's completely out of control. This could have been a lot different also, where the officer could have been struck in the face, knocked out, and there's different versions of what could have happened. I'm only going with what happened based on.
Are officers taught to resolve conflict in other ways besides physical? In other words, the first couple of times the man was tapping him, and if he had 0.18 alcohol, it was probably obvious that he was drunk. Is it possible for the officer to step back and diffuse the situation that way rather than getting more aggressive with the man and maybe...
I don't know that the officer got more aggressive. It looks like, according to the report, the aggression came from the suspect in this case, okay? The officer tried to calm the individual down, and when you look at the blood alcohol, he had an issue with his car. Don't know what he was going to do with that car. Get behind the wheel of that car. He wasn't behind the wheel of that car.
Wasn't it on a tow truck?
But it was taken off the tow truck and released back to his custody. So, right. I'm not going to get into what coulda. I'm just giving you what happened, and the aggression and the belligerence and the actions of the individual that was involved with the officer was what the officer responded to.
Does any other witness corroborate that officer's version of what happened?
I haven't reviewed any of the statements. Obviously, those will all go to the state attorney's office. I'm just giving you the basics that was in the report that was there. I also know there was another officer at the scene who she also indicated that she thought the officer was being choked. So, once again, I think that the best place for this to continue is in a courtroom with the state attorney's office, with the officers involved, with any witnesses that you've spoken to, any witnesses that we've spoken to. That's the appropriate place for it to resolve itself.
Is the department worried that he or his family will sue?
People always litigate or file litigation, whether it's against the police department, and we have legal representation that will represent us on those matters. We know that we're trained. We're trained to use techniques to effect arrests. That's what this officer did, and we respond to the actions of the individual that we're trying to arrest, and that's the best way I can say it.
It all started over he was angry his car was towed, and a lot of times when you see these things happen and maybe the suspect, as you call him, they get upset. A lot of people get upset when their cars get towed, and not just when they're drunk, but it just seems like sometimes you would expect the police officer to be the one who's a little more level-headed, that doesn't take it to the next level and sort of leave the situation the way it started as a simple situation over a car being towed. And when these things elevate to this degree, and I know you're saying that just because he's 84 doesn't mean he's not dangerous, but when things start out as a simple situation here and elevates to something like this, people just wonder why. Couldn't that officer wasn't that officer trained to handle it a little differently so that the man didn't end up in the hospital with a broken neck?
Well, certainly the officer was there. I probably imagine the officer never thought that this vet, who claimed he was a vet, would pull back his arm, grab the officer around the neck, and say that he wasn't going anywhere until he knocked out a cop.
Was the officer really afraid of this 84-year-old man?
Apparently he was of injury. I think if I went like that, I'm not going to wait around to see what he's going to do.
Could he just have done this?
I'm not going to speculate on what the officer effected an arrest based on the actions. He committed a crime by assaulting a law enforcement officer in the state of Florida and committed a felony also by battering a law. That's 2 crimes. We don't walk away from people that commit felony offenses. We don't retreat. So
are you, and then based on that, you are planning to prosecute this man to the fullest extent for
we will be sending to the state attorneys, as we do in any case, a filing package with all the statements. A crime was committed in the state of Florida against an Orlando police officer. That is a felony violation. We'll send that to the state, and it'll be up to the state attorney's office to decide whether they're going to move forward with formal charges. Okay?